The social worker's car pulled into the driveway at 3:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, carrying 3 more children, whose worlds had just been turned upside down. Mark Rodriguez watched from his living room window as caseworker Janet Martinez helped 2 teenage girls and a small boy gather their belongings, a few garbage bags, and a worn backpack that contained everything they owned. This was the 47th, 48th, and 49th time Mark had witnessed this scene in the past 10 years, and it never got easier. At 48, Mark lived alone in a 4-bedroom house that he'd specifically chosen for its capacity to shelter children who needed temporary homes. As a single man working as a high school guidance counselor, he'd initially planned to foster maybe 1 or 2 kids at a time, offering stability during their most vulnerable moments, before they moved on to adoptive families or reunified with biological parents. But 10 years and 50 foster children later, Mark had learned that the foster care system was more complicated than he'd imagined. Some children came for a few weeks while family situations stabilized. Others stayed for months, or even years, waiting for permanent placements that seemed increasingly unlikely as they aged out of the demographics most adoptive families preferred. And some, like the 3 children getting out of Janet's car today, came as part of sibling groups that the system struggled to keep together. The Martinez children, Mia, 12, Sofia, 10, Carlos, 8, Elena, 6, and baby Miguel, 18 months, had been in the system for 8 months after being removed from a home where neglect and substance abuse had made their situation unsafe. They'd been separated into different foster homes initially, with only Mia and Sofia placed together, while the others were scattered across different families throughout the county. The goal is always reunification, Janet had explained when she first called Mark about taking the 3 youngest. But realistically, these kids need stability now, and keeping them together is our priority. You're the only foster parent we have who can handle 3 more children. Mark's house had become a kind of sanctuary for children who had nowhere else to go. His spare bedrooms were furnished with bunk beds, dressers full of clothes in various sizes, and shelves lined with books, games, and toys accumulated over years of caring for children with different interests and needs. More importantly, his home operated on principles of safety, consistency, and unconditional positive regard that many of his foster children had never experienced. Every child who comes through that door gets the same message, Mark would tell new social workers during home visits. You're safe here. You're wanted here. You belong here for as long as you need to be here. And when you leave, you'll always have a place to come back to. The Martinez siblings' case had become complicated when their biological parents' rights were terminated 6 months after the children entered care. The parents had been unable to complete the required services and maintain sobriety long enough to regain custody. Suddenly, 5 children who had entered temporary care became available for adoption. But finding a family willing and able to adopt 5 siblings proved nearly impossible. Most families want babies or very young children, Janet had explained during one of their monthly case conferences. And most families want 1, maybe 2 children. Finding someone willing to take 5 siblings, including a baby and preteens, is like finding a needle in a haystack. That's when Mark had made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. After fostering the 3 youngest Martinez children for 6 months and watching them thrive in his care, after seeing how they talked constantly about their older sisters who were living across town, after watching Mia cry every time she had to leave after visits, Mark realized what needed to happen. He wanted to adopt all 5 of them. The idea wasn't entirely without precedent. Mark had developed strong attachments to several of his previous foster children and had considered adoption before. But those situations had involved single children, or pairs of siblings, and ultimately those children had found other permanent families. The Martinez siblings were different. They were a unit, a family within themselves, and they needed to stay together. Mark, Janet had said when he first mentioned his intention, "Are you sure about this? 5 children is a huge commitment. You'd be going from a family of 1 to a family of 6 overnight. Miguel will need daycare. Mia will be starting middle school. Carlos has some behavioral challenges from his early trauma. This isn't like fostering, where you know it's temporary. This would be forever." "I know," Mark had replied. And that's exactly why it feels right. These kids have been through enough uncertainty. They need someone who's committed to them forever, not someone who might change their mind when things get difficult. The adoption process had taken 8 months of home studies, background checks, psychological evaluations, and court hearings. During that time, Mark had worked with Janet to reunite all 5 siblings in his home, converting his office into a nursery for Miguel and rearranging bedrooms so the children could be together again. Watching the siblings reunite had confirmed for Mark that he was making the right decision. Mia immediately resumed her role as the protective older sister, helping Sofia with homework and teaching Elena how to braid her hair. Carlos, who had been acting out in his previous placement, settled down within days of being back with his siblings, and Miguel, who had been fussy and difficult to soothe in his temporary placement, became a happy, laughing baby once he was surrounded by the siblings who had cared for him since birth. It's like watching puzzle pieces fit back together, Mark had told his own sister during one of their phone calls. These kids belong together, and they belong with someone who understands that their bond with each other is the most important thing in their lives. The Family Feud opportunity had come through the adoption agency, which had nominated Mark and the children for the show's special episode featuring families made by choice. The nomination letter had focused not just on Mark's decision to adopt 5 siblings, but on his decade of service to the foster care system and his unique ability to provide stability for children during their most vulnerable moments. When Mark first received the call from the show's producers, his immediate concern was whether the experience would be appropriate for the children, particularly given their trauma histories and recent transitions. But when he mentioned the opportunity to Mia, Sofia, Carlos, and Elena, Miguel was too young to understand. Their excitement was immediate and unanimous. Papa Mark, Mia had said. She'd started calling him Papa Mark shortly after the adoption was finalized. Can we tell everyone on TV that you're the best dad in the world? And can we tell them that we're a real family now? Sofia had added. Can I bring my soccer ball? Carlos had asked, because at 8, he took his soccer ball everywhere. Can Miguel come too? Elena had wondered, because at 6, she couldn't imagine doing anything important without her baby brother. Their enthusiasm had convinced Mark that this could be a positive experience, a chance for the children to feel proud of their new family, and maybe help other people understand that families come in all different forms. The Rodriguez family team consisted of Mark and all 5 children. Miguel would primarily be held by Mark or Mia during the taping, but the producers had arranged for him to be part of the family presentation. They'd also arranged for the questions to be appropriate for children, and for the experience to be fun, rather than stressful for kids who had already been through too much. Steve Harvey noticed Mark's family immediately during the pre-show warm-up. There was something remarkable about watching a single man effortlessly manage 5 children of different ages, changing Miguel's diaper, helping Elena tie her shoes, reviewing strategy with Mia and Sofia, and redirecting Carlos's energy into positive channels. But what struck Steve most was the obvious love and trust between Mark and each of the children, and the way the siblings clearly adored their adoptive father. Mark, Steve said during introductions, tell me about your family. Mark stepped forward with Miguel on his hip, while the other 4 children arranged themselves around him with the kind of natural coordination that comes from being together constantly. We're the Rodriguez family from Phoenix, Arizona, Mark said, his voice filled with pride. This is Mia, who's 12, Sofia, who's 10, Carlos, who's 8, Elena, who's 6, and Miguel, who's 18 months. I adopted all 5 of them last year after being their foster dad. Steve's eyebrows raised with genuine amazement. You adopted all 5 of them? Mark, that's incredible. How long were you a foster parent before you decided to adopt? I've been fostering children for 10 years, Mark replied. I've had about 50 kids come through my home during that time, but these 5 are special. They're siblings who needed to stay together, and I couldn't imagine my life without them. Mia stepped forward slightly, the natural spokesperson for her siblings. Mr. Harvey, Mark didn't just adopt us, he saved us. We were separated when we first went into foster care, and he fought to get us all back together. He chose us when nobody else wanted all 5 of us. Steve was clearly moved by Mia's mature explanation and obvious devotion to Mark. Mia, What's it like having Mark as your dad? Steve asked gently. It's like finally being safe, Mia replied without hesitation. We never have to worry about being separated again, or about moving to another house, or about whether someone really wants us. Mark chose us, and we chose him back. Sofia nodded enthusiastically. He comes to all our school events, even when we have 3 different things on the same day. And he learned how to braid hair for me and Elena, even though he's not very good at it yet. Carlos, not to be left out, added, Papa Mark taught me how to ride a bike and how to throw a football, and he never gets mad when I have bad dreams about before. Elena, the quietest of the children, simply walked over and leaned against Mark's free side, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a gesture that spoke louder than words. Steve found himself profoundly moved by this family's dynamic and the obvious transformation that had occurred in these children's lives. The game began against the Thompson family from Georgia, and the Rodriguez family proved to be surprisingly competitive. Mark had clearly prepared the children for the experience, and they worked together with the kind of teamwork that comes from being a tight-knit unit. When questions came up about family, love, or home, their answers carried a weight that resonated throughout the studio. During commercial breaks, Steve found himself drawn to Mark's story and the way he'd created stability and love for children who had experienced profound instability. The way the children interacted with Mark and with each other suggested a family bond that was deep and genuine. It was during the 4th round that the question came that would allow Mark to articulate his understanding of what makes a family real. We surveyed 100 people, Steve announced. Name something that makes a real family. Mark was at the podium, with Mia holding Miguel nearby, and the other children watching intently. The question felt like an invitation to share everything he'd learned about love, choice, and the true meaning of family through his years of fostering and his decision to adopt. Choosing to love when you don't have to, Mark said clearly. The words carried such conviction, such depth of understanding, that the studio fell completely silent. Steve set down his cards immediately and approached Mark. Choosing to love when you don't have to, Steve repeated softly. Mark, that's beautiful. Tell me what you mean by that. Mark looked at his 5 children, each of whom was watching him with complete trust and adoration, then back at Steve. A lot of people think that family is about blood, about biology, about shared genetics, Mark said, his voice gaining strength. But I've learned that real family is about choice. It's about deciding to love someone not because you have to, but because you want to. It's about commitment that doesn't depend on circumstances. The audience was completely absorbed in Mark's explanation. These 5 kids didn't have to love me. Mark continued, I didn't have to love them. We chose each other, and that choice, that decision to be family, is stronger than any biological connection could ever be. Mia couldn't contain herself any longer. She handed Miguel to Sofia and stepped forward to stand beside Mark. Mr. Harvey, Mia said, her 12-year-old voice strong and clear. What Papa Mark means is that real families aren't made by accident. They're made on purpose. He chose us on purpose, even though we come with problems and bad memories and stuff that's hard, and we chose him back because he makes us feel like we matter. Steve was visibly moved by Mia's eloquent explanation and the obvious love between this father and daughter. Mark, Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. I need you to understand something. What you've done, opening your home to 50 children over 10 years, adopting 5 siblings who needed to stay together, that's not just generous, that's heroic. Mark shook his head. I'm not a hero, Mr. Harvey. I'm just a dad who got lucky enough to find his kids in an unusual way. No, Steve said firmly. You are a hero. You took children who had been abandoned, neglected, separated from each other, and you gave them everything they needed: stability, love, and most importantly, each other. Steve turned to address the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark and his children are showing us something that every person in America needs to see. They're showing us that family isn't about biology. It's about love. They're showing us that some of the most beautiful families are made by choice, not by accident. The audience began to applaud, but Steve continued. Mark, you didn't just foster children. You fostered hope. You didn't just provide temporary care, you provided permanent love. And these 5 kids didn't just get adopted. They got chosen by someone who understood that keeping them together was more important than anything else. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card. But then he paused. "Mark, I want to do something," Steve said. "I want to make sure people know about the thousands of children in foster care who need families, about sibling groups who need to stay together, about single parents and non-traditional families who can provide incredible homes. Would you be willing to help us spread awareness about foster care and adoption?" Mark nodded, tears flowing freely. "If it helps one more child find a permanent family, if it encourages one more person to consider fostering or adoption, then absolutely." Steve then did something unprecedented. He gestured for all 5 children to join Mark at center stage, creating a family huddle. "This jacket has been with me through thousands of shows," Steve said, removing his suit coat. "But today, it belongs to a family that's shown me what real love looks like." He draped the jacket over Mark's shoulders, but then he did something even more special. He knelt down and spoke directly to the children. "Mia, Sofia, Carlos, Elena, and Miguel," he said. "I want you to remember something. Your papa Mark didn't just adopt you. He chose you. And that choice, that decision to be your family forever, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on this stage." The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything the Family Feud studio had ever heard. The audience was on their feet, many crying openly, witnessing something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of pure love. But the moment that would become legendary happened when all 5 children, without prompting, wrapped their arms around Mark in a group hug, while Carlos looked up at Steve and said, "Papa Mark says that we're proof that families can be made any way, as long as they're made with love." The episode aired 14 weeks later and became one of the most impactful Family Feud episodes in the show's history. The segment featuring Mark and his children was viewed millions of times, but more importantly, it generated an unprecedented response from viewers interested in fostering and adoption. The National Foster Care Association reported a 250% increase in inquiries about sibling group adoption in the month following the episode's broadcast. Mark received thousands of messages from other foster and adoptive parents, from people interested in becoming foster parents, and from adult adoptees, who thanked him for showing the world what chosen families look like. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from children in foster care, who wrote to thank Mark for proving that someone might choose them too. Steve Harvey kept his promise to support foster care awareness, featuring Mark and his family on his talk show multiple times, and partnering with adoption organizations to promote awareness about the need for families willing to adopt older children and sibling groups. 3 years after the Family Feud appearance, Mark was invited to speak at the National Foster Care Conference, where he addressed an audience of social workers, foster parents, and advocates. Standing at the podium, wearing Steve's jacket that had become his signature at speaking events, Mark shared what he'd learned about family, choice, and love. "When I first started fostering," he told the crowd, "I thought I was helping children by providing temporary stability. What I learned is that children were helping me by teaching me what unconditional love really means." He looked out at the audience, which included several of his former foster children who had come to hear him speak. "Every child who came through my door taught me something different about resilience, about hope, about the capacity of the human heart to heal and trust again. But Mia, Sofia, Carlos, Elena, and Miguel taught me the most important lesson of all. That family isn't something you're born into, it's something you build with intention, commitment, and choice." Today, Mark Rodriguez continues to work as a guidance counselor, but he's also become a national advocate for foster care reform and sibling group adoption. Mia is now 15 and volunteers with the local foster care agency, mentoring other children in care. Sofia, 13, wants to become a social worker when she grows up. Carlos, 11, plays travel soccer and has never missed a game despite his early trauma. Elena, 9, is an honor student who loves to read. And Miguel, now 4, has no memory of life before Mark, but knows he's deeply loved and wanted. Their house still operates with the same principles of safety and unconditional love, but now it's focused on their permanent family, rather than temporary placements. Mark's spare bedroom has been converted into a homework room where all 5 children can study together, and the walls are covered with family photos, school achievements, and artwork that speaks to their journey together. In Mark's office at school, next to his guidance counselor credentials and student appreciation letters, hangs Steve Harvey's jacket alongside a photo of all 6 Rodriguez family members from the Family Feud taping. But the most meaningful display is a simple frame containing the adoption certificates for all 5 children, with a caption that reads, "Family, not always born, always chosen," because Mark had learned that the most profound truth about family isn't about genetics or biology. It's about the decision to love someone completely, to commit to their well-being forever, and to choose them every single day, regardless of the challenges that choice might bring. And in Phoenix, Arizona, in a house that has sheltered dozens of children over the years, 5 siblings who might have aged out of foster care separately are growing up together, secure in the knowledge that they are loved, wanted, and chosen by a man who understood that the most beautiful families are built with intention, dedication, and hearts big enough to love without conditions. Sometimes families are made in moments of decision rather than moments of birth. And sometimes the greatest parents are those who choose to love children who need choosing, proving that family is less about where you come from and everything about who chooses to love you home.